Alright, in this video I'm going to tell you why living with roommates is the most financially sound thing to do in your 20s. So ever since I moved out of my college dorm in college to an apartment, I never minded having roommates because the benefits outweighed all the negatives. Maybe it's because most of my roommates, if not all of them, were always responsible and cleaned up after themselves, at least in some portion of the way. I mean, no one's perfect. I say mostly because no one's perfect, and I guess someone makes mistakes sometimes. They might forget about a mess or whatnot. But I mean, that happens. But when it happens constantly, then you kind of have to wonder, why does this keep happening? The downsides of having roommates are that they might not clean up after themselves, they might leave big messes, or maybe it's sound pollution. So they might make a lot of noise with, whether it be like with music, or they bring like a lot of people over and throw parties and whatnot. And the sound pollution could definitely have an impact on your life. Another downside of potentially having roommates is that sometimes you just want to be alone, and I understand that, especially if you want to have or bring over a potential love interest. You definitely don't want roommates in that scenario. If you don't mind all the downsides, then we can move on to the rest of the video on all the benefits of having roommates and why you should have roommates in your 20s, if not for a long time. The number one expense that people have in their 20s is their housing, because housing costs so much, and probably the next biggest expense is probably going to be food. But the difference between them is so large, and it might be because there's just not enough housing, so supply and demand, housing will have to go up in price. So in millennials' early 20s, it's unlikely that they're going to have a house, like at least at this point in time, unless it's going to be a really cheap house, like a cabin in the middle of the woods, then yeah, you can have a house. So if you don't have a house or some kind of place that you own, what are you going to do for a living? And you're likely going to have to rent. So when you're renting, I guess the ideal thing to do is to save to buying up that potential home or permanent living space so that you can live in, or at least semi-permanent, because eventually you're going to move. So you have to save to get to that point, but how are you going to save if you're like always renting like one-bedroom apartments or something like that? It's going to be very difficult because the cost of one-bedroom apartments is a lot more expensive than the cost of like a four-bedroom apartment, or at least per person. The more roommates you get, the cheaper your rent will be. But not only your rent, so things like your utilities will also get cheaper. So think of stuff like your trash, your internet, your electric, your gas, your water. Maybe you want to cut your lawn and you don't have a lawnmower, or maybe you just don't want to use your lawnmower because reasons. So all these things will be cheaper because it'll be split among 2, 3, 4, 5 people, 10 people. I don't know. The sky's the limit with roommates, right? So not splitting all these utilities and not splitting the rent is likely one of the big reasons that people run into debt. Maybe another big reason is that they don't really track their spending, so they just spend whatever. And people might not track all these utilities because they think, oh, I need a utility, I need internet to survive, I need water, I need all these things to survive. So they don't really track it. And if they're not tracking it, it's not in their brain when they think about, why am I have so much debt? And then people wonder why, you always hear these stories about, why is the debt in the United States so high on credit card debt, on these loans? It's because they're not paying them back. They're student loans because they're spending so much money on other things like these utilities and rents and other shopping things. And you do not want to get too many roommates though, because each roommate will have diminishing marginal returns, of course. And it doesn't really help you that much in the long term of things. So pardon the fancy economic term there, diminishing marginal returns means that each roommate that you get will give you less and less savings on your total rent payment. So to give you an example of this, so let's say you are renting a house and it costs $3,000 per month to rent out to people, or to rent out to you. And your landlord needs that $3,000 every first of the month, so you got to somehow pay for it. And one way to do that is pay for it yourself, which might be expensive, just living on your own. Another way, though, is to just get one roommate. So each of you will pay 1.5K a month, which is, I guess, a little bit more manageable. Definitely more manageable than 3K a month. And then maybe get another roommate, and then your cost will be $1,000 a month. Assuming we're split evenly, which might not be the case, because sometimes like someone might get like a master bedroom in a house. But we'll just assume it's split evenly, like all the rooms are the same price. So that you went from 1.5K to 1K. So the savings there went down like by a good amount. So you're not saving that much more for adding that third person compared to when you added the second person to the house. And then eventually you get 9 roommates. Then the total rent for each person would be only $300, except you have 9 people living in the same house. At that point, it's like you either need a mansion for that many people, or you need at least a big house, or it's gonna feel like a hostel, and it feels like there's not gonna be enough resources or space to do anything, or no privacy at all, like multiple people in a room. But that might be the future. I don't know. Hopefully not. I imagine with 10 people living in the same house, it's like gonna be a clown house. Like you see those like clowns, like 10 clowns coming out of a clown car. That's what it's gonna be like. So I said it's useful and important. It can be like a good idea financially to have roommates in your 20s. But what about if you're not in your 20s? Why not have roommates in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on, or your teens, late teens? And it is still a good financial idea. It's just it could be harder to find said roommates as well. And it's going to be harder to find roommates when you're not like young. The reason behind this is because when you get older, more and more people will not want to rent anymore. They'll understand that renting can usually drain your resources, and it doesn't feel like you have anything when you just always pay rent for something and you don't get anything out of it. So that's why when people get older, they'll eventually want to buy a house, or maybe they'll get married and don't want to live with someone else anymore. And that's why it might be more difficult to find roommates when you get older. And I say your 20s, but it could be difficult in your 20s as well. And most people find their roommates, or people find roommates that are their friends or their colleagues, because no one wants to live with a stranger. And if you're not finding roommates that aren't friends or colleagues, you probably can look like on Craigslist or like Facebook or something like that. And I'm sure you could find someone, but the question is, will you want to trust them? Especially like if they're not like in the same age group as you, you're going to feel like you're not going to be one to trust someone. Well, at least most people don't want to trust someone they don't know, because they could potentially like be a thief, they could be dangerous. You don't really know these things. It's just like a random stranger on the street. So that's why another downside of roommates is you don't really know what you're going to get until you get it. And one thing that if you're not living in your 20s as well, that some people might look down on you if you're not like living by yourself and you're 30 years old. Some people might look down on you, and you know what I say to those people? I give advice to those kind of people. Don't care what other people think, because you're your own person. You don't have to care if someone says, oh, he's living with 15 roommates and he's 30 years old. What do you care? Like, he needs to save money so he can buy whatever he needs to buy. So I mean, yeah, just don't care what other people think. Focus on yourself. Don't care what other people say. Well, anyways, that's this video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you liked it. Peace.